A sewing lesson from Sew New York. Today I'm going to teach you the importance of the understitch and how to sew it. Hi, I'm Laura McCracken and welcome to Sew New York. Today I'm going to teach you the understitch. I'm going to show you the importance of the understitch and then I'm going to show you how to sew the understitch. And we're going to look at this brown top over here and let's begin. Let's look at this cotton top on the dress form. This is a sheer, lightweight cotton dotted Swiss peplum top. And it has a nice crisp round armholes and a nice round neckline. And the crispness and the neatness of that seam around the armholes and the neckline comes from using the understitch. The understitch is very simple to do, but most people don't understand it. It's a very important stitch. If you're a new sewer and the instructions tell you to do the understitch and you don't understand it, try and find information on it, because without doing the understitch, often the garment's going to look very homemade. It gives you a nice crisp edge, and when you do the understitch, you want to sew the understitch in before you press the seam. Most people think you press the seam and then you would do the understitch. After you sew in your facing or bias binding, this top has a bias binding around the armholes and the neckline. After you sew the seam around the neck connecting it would be a facing or the bias binding, you would then trim your seam and do an understitch, and then you would be able to press it. So let's take a look at an example of the understitch. I'll show you the inside of this top with the bias binding, and then we're going to look at an example of how to sew the understitch on a facing. It's the same method, just that one is a bias binding and one might be a facing. And those facings and bias bindings are the piece that's on the inside of the garment. Okay? So let's take a look at that. So what you're looking at right now is the inside of the brown dotted Swiss peplum top. And you're looking at the armhole. This is the outside edge right along here. And inside, you see this strip of fabric running down along here. That's the bias binding. And now the understitch is the stitch that made that edge nice and crisp. And you can just barely see it. It's a nice clean stitch right here. And it goes all the way around the whole armhole. And that's the understitch. Okay. I'm going to show you how to sew it in. We're going to look at it on a facing. This was the bias binding. We're looking at two pieces of muslin. This is a mock bodice piece, so we have a neckline and we have two armholes. And this is our facing piece. So the facing, this is a neck facing. The neck facing piece fits right in here at the neckline. And what I'm going to do next, I'm going to sew the neckline in, and then I'm going to show you how to sew the understitch. After you sew the facing in, you want to trim your seam allowance. And I would say to trim the seam allowance at least in half. A pattern instruction might say to trim it 3/8 of an inch. That means take off 3/8 of an inch. I'm going to trim it so I'm leaving about 1/4 of an inch. Here's our trimmed neckline, and you can see that the facing edges have been pinked along the edge and a nice running stitch to finish it. Okay, this is the inside of the facing, and that's the good side. And when you sew a facing on, you put the good side of the facing to the good side of the garment. So now we're going to do the understitch. At the machine, we're going to take the facing and we're going to turn it out so that now the underside is laying flat on top of the machine, and we're going to keep the little seam allowance that's been trimmed, this edge right here, that's going to stay right where it is, and you're going to sew very close to the edge right along here, so you're connecting the facing to that little seam, to the trim seam. Now we're going to put it into the machine, and we're going to get the stitch line right here. This edge, the stitch line, is going to line up with some edge of your foot. It's good to find a spot on the foot that you can use as a guide. I'm going to use this inner edge of the foot right here so that it goes right along the stitch line right there. and I'll show you. I'm going to slide it in. I'm setting up the edge of the foot right along the fold line. And now I'm going to stitch right along that the edge using the guide along the stitch line. Take a couple stitches in back tack. Okay, and let's do the understitch. You might need to stop as you go. Take your time. Keep that stitch line along whatever guide you decide to use. That's somewhere on the foot. And you're going to stitch all the way around, remembering to keep this taut, so you're sort of pulling the facing and the bodice opposite each other. All right, let's take a look at it. Now we're taking a look at the facing with the understitch. And what's going to happen is we're going to press it to the inside, and it practically lays flat on its own right now, if you can see that. That's going to give you that nice, beautiful, crisp edge. That I haven't even pressed it yet, and I'm just letting my hand turn the facing back. Do you see how nice and crisp that is? Here's the finished product. You can see a nice, smooth neckline. The facing is behind it. You can see the black thread here. I do use black threads when I demonstrate, or a contrasting color thread, so that you can see it. When you do your garment, of course you will use a matching thread. Let's take a look at the other side so we can see what it looks like from the inside. All right, and that's the understitch going right around the neckline. And I'm going to zoom in a little bit closer so we can take a nice look at it. That's it. Let me give you a better view there. And that's the understitch. And here it is again for you close up. Nice and neat, really nice, clean, crisp edge all the way around. All right, see you at the next lesson.